Alrighty tighty folks, we are back today in the shop removing a transmission from I believe it was a 14 Jeep Patriot. Oh boy, let me tell you, okay, this thing. There's going to be 3 videos, and this is going to be like a little mini-series kind of thing. Stay tuned for the others. The first thing we have is doing the diagnostic. I was asked by, this is for a used car lot, so they're selling it. It makes a terrible noise when the clutch pedal is released, and the noise goes away when the clutch pedal is depressed. When you depress the pedal, you are releasing the clutch mechanism itself. When you release the pedal, you are engaging the clutch. Here forward, we will view it from the clutch perspective, not the pedal perspective. So I was asked to diagnose what was this really funny sound when the clutch was engaged, but not when the clutch was disengaged. Once we get underneath, I will put the microphone in different places, and we will listen to where the noise appears to be coming from. Transmission. Clutch. Engine. Belts. And as you can probably tell, the noise was the loudest at the back end of the transmission, so the end that is furthest away from the engine. I determined this was they call it the input shaft bearing. It is not the input shaft bearing, it is the main shaft rear bearing. The input shaft bearing is obviously the bearing on the shaft that is the input from the engine to the transmission. Technically it's the same shaft, so you could call it rear input shaft bearing, but to be clear, it is a better idea to say rear main shaft, because it is the primary shaft, because it is the driven shaft. Right? The other shaft that holds the gears inside of a transmission is the counter shaft. It spins opposite direction from the main shaft, obviously because it's a single gear over. You then take your counter shaft and you output that to a differential, which gives you the correct direction of rotation to transfer energy to your wheels to move your vehicle. The disassembly process for most of this was fairly straightforward. There was nothing really too incredibly difficult about it. One of the hardest things maybe was the shifter cables. They're on there pretty good, and it's just a kind of a clampy mechanism. You just have to pry them off. And of course, taking bolts off in a rust belt state, things break, obviously. But most of this, again, pretty straightforward. I pulled the airbox. I pulled one of the bolts out of the ECU because the ECU is bolted to the top of the airbox before I realized I could just take the whole airbox out. So that's what we did, took the whole airbox out, easy peasy. The book tells you, okay, Chrysler's book tells you have to remove the exhaust in its entirety to remove the manual transmission from these Patriots. That is a lie. You absolutely do not have to remove the exhaust. There is no need to pull anything more than is absolutely necessary to do a job. And I realize this camera angle, I don't have any equipment that allows me to put the camera inside the engine bay stably. We're pulling out the Airbox Bracket there. Easy peasy, job's a good one. You can see this took all of 20 minutes. This little clip is just showing the shifter cables. There you go, there's both of them. The clutch fluid line, it's a hydraulic clutch, so there's your fluid line. This shares a reservoir with the brake master, which is a thing that newer cars tend to do. We also have the transmission mount there in the image, so we pull those out. The big breaker bars for obviously the transmission mount, because those bolts are going to be tighter-ish, so you're going to want to use bigger tools and long extensions so that you can use the bigger tools, obviously. But going back to what I was saying before, I don't have equipment that I can stably mount a camera inside the engine bay. Oh yeah, and then this. Haha, hee. Hey Chrysler, you want to put this motor mount system in there, right? And you want to hold the engine, the transmission in place. Don't use a through bolt with a free nut, so you need 2 tools to take it off. Weld the nut to the bracket. It takes nothing from a manufacturing standpoint. It's a drop in the hat. It's not even pennies to do that. Do not use a free nut. This is a common American OEM issue. They like to use free nuts. This wire I just ended up moving because it was in my way. And then we could talk for a long time about this incredibly terrible connector design. It's better than Delphi. I will give them that. It is better than GM's constant thumb-shredding, nonsensical Delphi connectors, but marginally. There's also this one bolt, sorry about the shaky image, that's on the throttle body bracket. For whatever reason, it's mounted to the transmission bell housing instead of the engine like it should be, so you have to remove that bolt. It's a 10 mil, it's not got a whole lot of torque on it, it's super easy to come out. The next step, obviously, once we get all the stuff off the top of it, the airbox, the ECU, all of the bolts and the shifters and the fluid line, all of that, is you pull the wheels and you start pulling the suspension components that you need to pull to remove the CV axles, constant velocity shaft axles. Because you cannot pull the transmission if your axles are still installed. Because they go in the transmission. So we gotta pull. We also have to pull this motor mount bracket, which is this sort of, long bracket underneath. I was pointing at these bolts and I left it in because it had footage attached to it that I also needed. Ignore those bolts. Gotta pull the CV axle. And we have to pull the transfer case and drive line. And this stupid motor mount here, which you cannot get out unless you remove the transmission. You can't get it out unless you remove the transmission. To replace the motor mount, you pull the transmission. How smart is that? Super smart. I'm sure on the two-wheel drive it was a lot easier, but there's no room with the transfer case installed to be able to get that bracket out of there. I also spent a good, 3 hours trying to remove the lower ball joint because that would have been the simpler method of removing the CV axle. Suffice it to say, rust state, right? Salt states. The ball joint wasn't coming out without heating it up and penetrating oil and all kinds of stuff. Probably 4 or 5 hours worth of messing around with it. So I decided not to do that. What I ended up doing was pulling the struts, the strut bolts, the lower strut bolts that hold the knuckle to the strut, and then moving it out of the way that way. It's effectively the same thing. You're removing the top instead of the bottom. It's not a huge difference. The single ball joint would have been simpler, in my opinion, but it genuinely doesn't matter. There's going to be a few shots of just my back in all of this, because again, sometimes you can't just get the camera in there. But you can see, this is me prying on the brake pads, and then hammering on the brake pads to try to remove them from the caliper bracket. The brakes in this vehicle did not work. You would put your foot down, they'd go almost all the way to the floor before it'd start doing any kind of slowing down. The face, yes, the face. Exactly, the face. And I'm trying real hard not to screw the brake pads that are on there up, even though I'm 99% certain we're going to be replacing them. I've already seen the back of the rotor at this point. I know for a fact that the brake pads are just completely toast. But what ended up happening is somebody had swapped the pads without changing the rotors. Never do that. Always replace or resurface your rotors. Always when changing brake pads. They also did not clean the rust off of the caliper bracket before putting new hardware in. These brake pads were kind of oldish, but judging by the wear pattern on them, you can tell they've been on there doing this for quite some time. This vehicle was dangerous. This should not have been on public roads with other human beings operating their own personal private property. It was just absurd. I don't understand how this vehicle was driven, and the people that were operating were like, no, yeah, this is fine, this is great. There's a great little Jeep, yeah, I love this thing. No. Do not do this stuff. Yeah, and you can see there, I'm trying a different method of tapping the pad gently with a 6-pound sledge, because literally that's all this shop has. They have a carpenter's hammer, and they have a 6-pound sledge. That's it. They have no ball-peen hammers. I'm working on it. We're going to outfit the shop correctly. Every bay is going to have a full complement of hand tools. There will be a set of air tools. I've already fixed the compressor, electrical, and airline piping. We're working on it. It's a process. But you can see, look at how, so you've got some shiny, but you've got all that rust. 50% of the rotor surface was not being used, which tells you that the pads are not moving. Which means it was stopping due to the rear brake force only. What? These people are insane. And I see this, like, I see this so much in this state. It's Idaho, mind you. Northern Utah, southern Idaho. These people are insane. It kind of bugs the crap out of me. I don't know if you can tell. It's not a trigger or anything. No, not at all. Not one bit. Anyway, let's get back to the explanations. Here, we're pulling the McPherson strut lower bolts. We could also talk for hours on McPherson struts. They do a thing, but I really don't like them. I really, really do not like McPherson struts. I believe suspension should have upper and lower control arms, and the strut should be mounted to the lower control arm as a control assist mechanism only. The strut should not be relied on for maintaining proper suspension geometry. I also spent a good 2 hours trying to remove, wait for it, the wheel sensor, the wheel speed sensor that feeds the ABS. It's plastic. It wouldn't come out. There's so much rust on the inside of that hole, it wouldn't come out. You'd have to drill it out. I was like, well, I don't want to replace that, so we're not doing that. And then you have me being thoroughly confused by the fact that pulling the CV axle dumps all of the ATF out of the transmission. It's a manual transmission, and it's filled with ATF. And pulling the CV axle seems to dump all of it for some reason. The axles are bathed? That seems strange to me. Shouldn't the diff sit a little bit higher in the transmission case? I don't know. It's weird to me. I've seen a little bit, like I've seen transmissions, you pull the CV axle out and a little bit of oil drips out, or it comes out and you may get maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 ounces, but no, this poured out, which you couldn't see in the camera because my fat butt was in the way. But we put the little drippity drip pan under there and pull the axles out, pull this lower bracket out. Honestly, it's fine. This lower bracket, it's a Mitsubishi design. Mitsubishi did this a long time ago in the late 70s, early 80s, and Chrysler has kind of used it ever since they had their deal with Mitsubishi years and years and years ago. It works. It does a thing. I don't really have a whole lot of complaints about it. It makes doing motor mounts kind of simple a lot of times, especially if you put, I don't know, 2 motor mounts, a front and a back, on the same bracket. It also helps keep some of the metal in the front a little bit more rigid in that direction, because it's not going to go forward, it's not going to go back, it's not going to move a whole lot. So you get a little bit more structure out of it when you have a beam installed across multiple members in that fashion. This is just sped up footage of me pulling out the passenger side CV axle. Nothing really different. You pull the cotter pin, you pull the keeper washer, you pull the, I think it was a 36 mil or a 38 mil axle nut, you pull the spindle, and you pop the CV axle out, easy peasy. Of course, me not remembering, oh yeah, you pulled the transmission out, or the transmission mount out, you should probably support this thing before you try pulling these bolts and destroying them. Don't worry about it, it's fine. I know what I'm doing. You don't know me. And as much as I can, I like to try to put bolts back where they came from. So that face that you might have noticed was because every single bolt on this machine is different from every single bolt beside it. No 2 bolts share the same tool. No 2 bolts share the same length, apparently. It's absurd. You pull this thing apart and it takes you a 10, an 11, a 12, a 13, a 14, a 15, a 16, an 18, a 19, a 22, a 21. It takes you almost an entire socket set just to pull the transmission out. Like a Honda, it would be a 10, a 12, a 14, and a 17. 4 different sockets. Well, I guess the 32 for the axle nut. But it's ridiculous. It's silly. It's absurd. Also, while we're just kind of doing this, moving stuff around a bit, you guys might want to take a drop by the Discord if you have problems or questions or anything. It's a lot easier way of getting a hold of me than YouTube comments. And the Discord is now public. It's available. I put the link in every video, and I have been for a little bit now. I wanted to drop the links in and have them available before announcing that the server was public and open for invites, free invites. Just as an experiment, just to see how things would go. I don't believe I've gotten any people from YouTube directly to come in, but it is now open. It is available. I'm pretty sure I've got most of it sorted out. And if anybody wants to come in and take a look and has any ideas, I am always open to new ideas. Whether I implement them or not is another story, or whether I even remember that you've given me an idea. That's why I like Discord. You have the record of it, right? So feel free to drop by the Discord. I also have Patreon and Ko-fi, or Ko-fi, depends on how you want to read the word. Coffee makes sense because buy me a coffee so I can, I'll wake up in the morning, whatever. The whole goal was to provide education and some small entertainment in showing people that automobiles are not nearly as difficult or scary as some people might believe, and to hopefully make it something that I can live off of to pay my bills. I'm not looking to get rich. That's never been the goal. And then we go to this face. Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. So the transfer case, okay? They call it a power distribution unit. You have these 4 holes on the bottom. They all sit on the same plane. You would then assume or expect that you would also then have 3 or 4 bolts up top. You see one and a hole there, and then another just to the left frame there, There's another one hidden behind the exhaust. Those sit on the same plane. That top hole in the back is not a bolt hole. That hole that I just zoomed into sits on a completely different plane as the other three. It took me 2 hours to figure out that this was not a case bolt for assembling the two case halves of the differential, transfer case, sorry, but was in fact the bell housing bolt, the mounting bolt to the transmission for the transfer case. There's already a hole there! Use that one! Like, oh my god, Chrysler, why? There's memes. Look up engineers and mechanics memes. There's memes. I'm not going to say it in a video, but there's memes that exist because automotive engineers, most especially American automotive engineers, seemingly have this rude word thing for doing everything they can to make the repair more difficult. And it makes no sense, because you look at some of these things and you're like, okay, well maybe they did it for ease of manufacturing. But then you stop and you think, but in a manufacturing plant, things need to move quickly. Everything needs to go like on a jig or on a table, and it all needs to move in a flow and a line, and you know, this guy does these 3 bolts, the next guy does the next 3 bolts, the next guy mounts the thing to the thing and puts these 3 bolts, etc., etc., and it's, you know, continuing down the line. It makes no sense to have that one bolt on a separate plane. Like, you didn't even need that bolt, honestly. There were 3 bolts on the top, 4 bolts on the bottom. That is more than sufficient fastener torque and connection quality than really is needed for the situation. You should see that. You saw the transfer case. It's tiny. It's itty bitty. It's the size of my head for a transfer case. It's 4-wheel drive transfer case. It's completely nutty. So there was no need for that bolt to be there in the first place, and there was no need for it to be on a different plane such that it was more difficult to determine that that was the mounting bolt, not a case bolt. Right? Rant over and aside, after finding that, literally it was that one bolt, you pull that out, there's one bell housing bolt behind it, again, also not needed. You could have pulled the transmission and transfer case out in one go if you didn't have to pull a bell housing bolt stuck behind the transfer case. But you get those 2 bolts out and bam-a-lam, there you go. I actually spent 10 hours one day pulling everything apart, except for those 2 bolts. I came back the next day and found those 2 bolts, because I was already tired and irritated and hot and sweaty and bleh. So, pulled those 2 bolts, and the whole thing just comes right out. And bam, look at that, motor mount. The one that you can't get out without removing the transmission. It's absurd. It's nonsensical. I tried for a good 20 minutes with the transmission installed before I pulled it out, which I cut that footage out. You guys didn't need to see that, but I tried for a good 20 minutes to pull that bracket out, just twisting and turning and moving the transmission, and you know, because you unbolt it and it can move to the one side or move to the other side. Nothing. Couldn't get it out. Literally, if it hadn't been a giant triangle and had just been bolted to a plate on the subframe, it would have come out no problem. Easy peasy. They could have made the subframe have a stand. And you see, back here is where that transmission mount went, and the transfer case. And you see how tight that is, right? There's no need for that. No need at all. But what are you gonna do, huh? It exists, and you have to do the job. So with the transmission out and the transfer case removed, you can see that is all the stuff that we had to remove to get them out, which isn't that much. We go on to disassembling the transmission. Stay tuned, come back. I will have the transmission rebuild video coming out soon. this is a little preview of that. So if you want to see that, stay tuned, and that will be posted shortly. I'll be posting 2 versions of it, a short and a long. The long one's about an hour. We'll talk about that when we get there. But as always, if you guys stopped by and you liked the video, don't forget to give it a like, give it a subscribe. Well, give me a subscribe, not the video. You don't subscribe to the video, you subscribe to the channel. But, you know, hit the little buttony-doos at the bottom there. And at this point, this is just the, you know, sneak preview of the transmission, the inside of the transmission. You should really, really come back for the next version, because it is going to be... Whew, we're going to be talking about some things, okay? There's some stuff, and there's some things about this particular transmission that... Remember we were talking about engineers will climb over a pile of something to do something to technicians as much as they can? This kind of falls in line with that. There might be a little bit of ranting in the next video. So I would absolutely recommend, if you didn't watch this video, and of course if you didn't watch this video you're not going to hear this, so I don't know why I'm saying it, but I'm going to say it anyway because it needs said. But if you didn't watch this video and you just want to see the inside bits, there will be chapter markers in both of the videos, and all 3 of the videos, and you should really listen to the commentary for the next video. I'm sure it's going to be absolutely riveting, having no idea what I'm going to say exactly. I don't write a script for this stuff, you know. It's at this point, at the end of this video, I'm just kind of rambling to fill out the time, because, you know, that's what I have to do, I guess. And we'll talk about what I'm doing here in the next video. Again, stay tuned. It'll be coming out a week after this video. I think in the next video I'm also going to try something a little bit different with the commentary. A little bit, not a whole lot. I've had this idea just while recording the commentary for this video to maybe make the next one a little bit better. Better in my eyes. I don't know if you guys will like it. If you do, drop a comment, let me know. Drop by the Discord, let me know. Comments on YouTube are a little bit better for talking about the video specifics, because it boosts the numbers for the algorithm. The more people that talk about something, the more likely YouTube is to suggest it to more people. So absolutely comment on the videos. Comments are huge helps. Subscriptions are huge helps. Likes are even bigger helps. I don't know what the order is, but I would say like, comment, and subscribe in that order is probably, honestly, the way people like, yeah, like, comment, and subscribe, blah, 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 blah. As always, don't forget to like it, subscribe it, crank it, and rip it. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.